After my first year of seminary, which is called your junior year, I and most of my classmates and seminarians around the country in the same year as we all go and do our clinical pastoral education at a hospital. It's called CPE. You spend 11 weeks working in a hospital, basically being torn down, everything you ever knew about pastoral care, and then they sort of build you back up. It's a hard, intense summer, and there are, like I said, there are programs in hospitals all over the country. I elected and applied to several hospitals in Boston, Massachusetts, because I knew that I had a place to stay if I were to go there. The rector of Trinity Copley Square and his wife were longtime friends of mine, and they had offered to let me live in the rectory if I was given acceptance to one of the hospitals to which I applied. I ended up working at Mass General that summer. Now, some people worked living in a rectory. You'd think they might be close quarters. And the rectory at Trinity Copley Square was either 4 floors or 5 floors. There was space to do cartwheels and handsprings down the thing. It was a glorious place to live that summer. And the church where I worshiped on Sunday, Trinity Episcopal Church in Copley Square, was magnificent. One of its distinguishing features is its pulpit. It rises for what seems like 30 feet above the congregation, and the preacher is able to see above and beyond and through the entire congregation out. The detail is amazing. Now, I'm absolutely certain that it's not 30 feet high, but it felt like that to me because I was privileged toward the end of my summer to be able to preach at Trinity Copley Square before I was shuffled off back to seminary. Now, obviously, they didn't let me preach at the principal service. They didn't even let me preach at a morning service. But I got the early evening service where the congregation was a little smaller, and if Green Seminarian was too rough, I don't know what they did. I haven't heard anything about it since. It's been a long time ago. The first rector, though, of Trinity Copley Square, I think it was the first, Phillips Brooks, who helped to build it and then rebuild it or build it after a fire, played a very intensive and direct role in the rebuilding of Trinity's and its design. And there's one feature of the architecture or of the place that's known really only to the preacher as he or she approaches and comes into this enormous, giant, high-up pulpit. There is now a plaque, but there were words carved into that area that the preacher sees when you get inside the lectern at the pulpit, and it reads, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." They are, of course, the words that the Greeks spoke to Philip, who then went and found Andrew. And then Philip and Andrew went then to go and tell Jesus that these Greeks were anxious to see Jesus and maybe to speak to Jesus. We believe now that they were probably Greek Jews, not Greek Gentiles. But even so, to have these men come from such a long way to see this person whose reputation, Jesus, had spread so far that people were willing to come from all over, different areas, different regions, to listen, to see, to be nearby this man who had promised and preached about a different way of living and a different way of life. Jesus has just raised Lazarus from the dead when we get to this portion of the Gospel of John. And the crowds are growing larger and larger, and more believers are following, which in turn raises the anxiety and the ire of the Roman authorities as well as the Jewish priests and scribes. The higher ups were worried about what it was that Jesus was teaching, which they believed in terms of love your neighbor, but it was a complete upside down turnaround of the laws that they had been following for centuries and centuries. When Philip reported to Jesus that the Greeks had asked to see him, it is as if that very moment, with that report, with that request, that Jesus realized something. And he said, "The hour has now come for the Son of Man to be glorified." It's a major turning point in John's Gospel. Jesus has made previous references about how the hour has not yet come, or my time is not yet here. Some of you may remember at the wedding in Cana of Galilee, when speaking to his mother, he made that, "My hour has not yet come." Or later on in John's gospel, he makes the same, the time is not yet. But now, Jesus knows. These Greeks who had traveled such a distance were seeking to meet Jesus. He knew then that his mission was no longer restricted to Israel, but had become or was becoming universal. It was time for him to be lifted up, that is, crucified, so that all the people could be drawn to him. His mission, the first portion of his mission on earth, had now been fulfilled. Sir, we wish to see Jesus. Phillips Brooks, the rector of Trinity Copley Square, knew that everyone who steps into a pulpit and presumes to preach the gospel needs to think about all of this, needs to think about what it means to preach, to talk about Jesus. Because sometimes there's a temptation to give our hearers something other than Jesus. Not that we're talking about all these secular things, but sometimes we don't do it often enough or focus quite enough. Some Jesus, but maybe not enough. Sometimes the passage is just a little wonky and priests get diverted off into other areas. Sometimes it's been a hard week and we don't fulfill our mission to preach about Jesus to people who wish to see Jesus. But it's not only preachers who do this. All around us are people who want to see Jesus. Do they see him in us, in you, or in me? Do they? Do they see the servant who washed the feet of his family, his friends, his disciples? Do they see the healer in us who made the blind to see? If we are to let people see Jesus in us, then we have to go ourselves and sit at his feet. Let him heal us, become and be willing to take his body broken for us. And above all, stand at the cross and wonder as the word that spoke out of the void lapses into death and silence. I think we all need a lot more of Jesus, all of us. It's not a problem only for preachers, like I said, but a regular opportunity for any of us who call ourselves Christians. We can look around the world today, we see our headlines. Where do we need to see Jesus right now? In the first responders, healthcare workers, frontline employees, scientists who are battling for answers during this worldwide pandemic. Do we see Jesus in their sleepless nights, in their endless quest for answers? Do we see Jesus in the social justice movements that are going on right now so that we see those who are helping the least, the last, and the lost? Do we see Jesus in their hope and in their pain and in their fear? Can we see Jesus in their faces? Do we see Jesus in each other's faces? Sir, we wish to see Jesus, the Greeks said to Philip. We too need to see Jesus so that when others want to see Jesus, they can see him in us. Amen.